All right, I think we are live right now. This is Luke Radowski of WeAreChange.org. As we know, U.S. Labor Secretary Alexander Acosta is set to speak within just moments, within just 3 minutes right now. And of course, we're going to be covering that as well as his comments live as everything here unfolds. Let me go double check, make sure that we are officially streaming on our YouTube channel. Again, apologies in advance. Still haven't done my own little live stream here on YouTube, but again, we are learning everything as we are rolling with the punches. Of course, we will be taking your comments. We will be taking your super chats, of course, predominantly, and engaging in a bigger dialogue here. I do believe that I did send out the wrong link, though, on my Twitter account. Hold on 1 second. I do have to fix that really quickly, but feel free to tune in. Feel free to share this. We're going to be live throughout the duration of the U.S. Labor Secretary now not only giving a statement but taking questions. This is huge, guys. This is big. A lot of people have not seen this coming. A lot of people don't know what the Labor Secretary is going to be saying. Again, we got the stream ready up to go at any moment and time. Hold on 1 second. Let me just fix the latest post that I just made and fix the correct link. There we go. That's a lot better. All right, guys. So I haven't been live on this YouTube channel for a very, very long time. I am solo here, and we, of course, will be going over a number of articles, a series of videos, statements, and, of course, mysteries, because again, the mysteries here are astonishing. As you can see, we have everything ready here, set up to go here, because of all the pressure that the U.S. Labor Secretary has been facing, with many prominent Democrats calling for his resignation, always because he gave the sweetheart deal to Jeffrey Epstein. And that's why we have many prominent Democrats, including many presidential candidates from Bernie Sanders, Christian Gillibrand, Tim Ryan, John Delaney, Amy Cullen Booker, I don't even know who that is, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Beto O'Rourke, Seth Moulton, Michael Bennet, Elizabeth Warren, Julian Castro, Joe Biden, and, of course, Chuck Schumer himself, who, by the way, took in thousands of donations from Jeffrey Epstein, who, by the way, it is still a complete mystery how this man made his money. No one knows. He's just a billionaire, and he just has unexplained wealth. I just released a video on this channel that goes into some of the theories, some of the speculations. I don't like to theorize, but if I do entertain some ideas, I tell you, hey, this is the evidence that suggests this. There's no clear evidence, and I think that's an important distinction in what other media organizations and even so-called independent media organizations do, because there's a lot of bullcrap and hooey out there, and it's important to be as genuine and as honest during this critically important time where we finally have the world's attention on a mystery billionaire pedo that's not only connected to the Clintons and the Trumps. We're talking about Koch, Soros, Rockefeller, Rothschild, Kissinger, the Israeli government. My goodness, golly gracious, family-friendly show, by the way. The connections here are absolutely astronomical, absolutely insane. Again, if you guys have any specific questions, feel free to ask it. Already, the government is late. They said that they were going to be doing a press conference exactly at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, but that's not a surprise here. Chose says, did Epstein invest in Bitcoin? No, I'm reading some of the comments right now. I do not believe Epstein did invest in any Bitcoin. I don't know. A lot of his wealth is, of course, still shrouded in mystery. Thomas F. Holland just gave a super chat of 109 SEK. I don't know what SEC means, but thank you so much. Leave in the comment, go get them, Luke. That's why we are here. That's why we're doing this independent media broadcast, because, again, no one else other than a few individuals are actually covering this in a fair way. A lot of people are just talking about Clinton and trying to indict Clinton here. A lot of people are talking about Trump and just trying to indict Trump here. Again, that's mainly also the mainstream media doing that. But, again, it's important to give you the full picture here. People are asking... again, I'll get to all your particular personal questions. I want to stay on topic here because this is extremely important, what's happening here. Extremely important moment in time in our history right now where we finally have the world's attention on this incredible ring with hundreds of victims. And again, it's going to be very interesting to see what Alexander Acosta says in just a few moments. Acosta's statements are very unexpected. This was an announcement not made by the White House. This was an announcement made by, of course, the U.S. Department of Labor, which, by the way, we also found out. Here, let me go back into the little document cam that I have here set up. But again, a lot of hypocrisy on both sides. Both sides need to be called out here. There does deserve to be accountability. There does deserve to be honesty in this, and not just people trying to get political brownie points. A lot of people are just trying to get power from this, and you shouldn't. It's simple. It's evil versus good. People who are doing evil acts need to be held accountable, whether they are perceived as Democrats or Republicans, because they're all, in my opinion, criminals. And again, it's important to look at all the facts here, and a lot of people are not doing it. Acosta, in my opinion, I have not seen any contradictory evidence suggesting that he, of course, didn't have a negative hand in this entire situation. We also have an article here talking about how he wanted to try to slash anti-trafficking programs in the U.S. federal government by 80%. I mean, this is just insanity. And the sweetheart deal that Epstein got, my goodness, golly gracious. The deal that Epstein got, by the way, I don't know if many people realize this. Epstein got put in a private wing of a jail, which is unheard of, for 13 months, where literally, oh wait, here's Acosta. Here's making a statement right now.
Let me start by reiterating that I'm pleased that the New York prosecution is going forward. They brought these charges based on new evidence against Jeffrey Epstein, who is now a registered sex offender, and this is a very, very good thing. His acts are despicable, and the New York prosecution offers an important opportunity to more fully bring Epstein to justice. In 2008, a major newspaper described the Epstein prosecution like this. A Florida grand jury, that is, a grand jury convened by the district attorney of Palm Beach County, had charged Epstein with a lesser offense. At that time, the Epstein legal team was elated. He would have avoided prison altogether. But then the United States Attorney's Office in Miami became involved. Epstein got an ultimatum: plead guilty to a charge that would require jail time and registration, or face federal charges. And that was the week, more than 10 years ago, that Epstein went to jail. Times have changed, and coverage of this case has certainly changed since that article. Facts are important, and facts are being overlooked. This matter started as a state matter. It was prosecuted initially by the state of Florida and not by the U.S. Attorney's Office. In 2006, a grand jury convened by the state attorney, the district attorney of Palm Beach County, reviewed the evidence and recommended a single charge. And that charge would have resulted in no jail time at all, no registration as a sexual offender, and no restitution to the victim. Further, the state attorney's office allowed Epstein to self-surrender and arraigned him the following morning. Simply put, the Palm Beach State Attorney's Office was ready to let Epstein walk free, no jail time, nothing. Prosecutors in my former office found this to be completely unacceptable, and they became involved. Our office became involved. Our prosecutors, as this 2008 article recounts, presented the ultimatum: plead guilty to more serious charges, charges that required jail time, registration, and restitution, or we'd roll the dice and bring a federal indictment. Without the work of our prosecutors, Epstein would have gotten away with just that state charge. Now, many today question the terms of that ultimatum, what's called the non-prosecution agreement. Good prosecutor will tell you that these cases are complex, especially when they involve children, and even more so in 2006. I've shared with those in this room today, and will make available publicly, an affidavit filed by the career prosecutor in a civil matter related to the Epstein case. She talks about the challenges faced. She talks about the victims being scared and traumatized, refusing to testify, and how some victims actually exonerated Epstein. Most had significant concerns about their identities being revealed. The acts that they had faced were horrible, and they didn't want people to know about them. And she goes on to write that, quote, after the fact, people alleged that Epstein would have been easily convicted. As the prosecutor who handled the investigation, she says in this affidavit, these contentions overlooked the facts that existed at the time. Her description of these facts are corroborated by the FBI case agent, whose affidavit I've also shared today. Thousands of prosecutors around the nation this week are weighing guilty pleas versus trials. These cases, as I said, are hard. They require a prosecutor to ask whether a plea that guarantees jail time and guarantees registration, to ask whether that plea versus going to trial, how do you weigh those two if going to trial is viewed as the roll of a dice? The goal here was straightforward. Put Epstein behind bars, ensured he registered as a sexual offender, provide victims with the means to seek restitution, and protect the public by putting them on notice that a sexual predator was in their midst. This case, people have said, was unusual. And it was. It was complicated by the fact that this matter started as a state investigation. A state grand jury brought that single, completely unacceptable charge. A state official allowed Epstein to self-surrender. And so it is unusual because it's unusual for a federal prosecutor to intervene in a state matter such as this. We've seen cases recently, different set of facts, different. I don't want anyone to say I'm comparing these cases, but we've seen other cases where state prosecutors let folks go with no sentence and people shake their heads. In this case, the federal office intervened before the plea was taken and said, stop. Because if that plea is taken at the state level, you're going to face serious federal issues. Today, we know a lot more about how victims' trauma impacts their testimony. And this, too, is important. Our juries are more accepting of contradictory statements, understanding that trauma-impacted memories work differently. And today, our judges do not allow victim shaming by defense attorneys. I have viewed the victim interviews. They're hard to watch because I know that my former colleagues, the men and women of my office, wanted to help them. I wanted to help them. That is why we intervened. And that's what the prosecutors of my office did. They insisted that he go to jail and put the world on notice that he was and is a sexual predator. Epstein's actions absolutely deserve a stiffer sentence. For years, there have been rumors of investigations in other jurisdictions. And he should be prosecuted in any state in which he committed a crime. If there are other states in which he committed crimes, if there are other states that can bring state charges, they should consider those as well. And so I absolutely welcome this New York prosecution. It is the absolutely right thing to do, and I'm happy to take questions.
Eric. My goodness. Oh,
Eric
Lord.
Morath.
I got so much to say from all of
How
this.
would you describe your relationship with the president? Do you feel that the news, the cycle here with Epstein is changing that?
My relationship with the president's outstanding. He has, I think, very publicly made clear that I've got his support. He spoke yesterday in the Oval Office. He and I have spoken. Let me add, I keep reading about articles about my relationship with me and Mr. Mulvaney. And he called me this morning to say, if asked, that our relationship is excellent too, and that any articles to the contrary are, in his words, BS. And so I'm here, I'm defending this case, that's my job. Tom.
Oh my goodness.
Tom
I-
Yamas,
so
ABC News.
pisses me off. There's so many questions I
Secretary,
wanna ask here.
a lot of people are watching this news conference, including several young women who say they were teenagers when Jeffrey Epstein sexually assaulted them. They say they went to you looking for help, and they didn't hear back from you until it was too late. Do you owe them an apology?
So
Better question.
you're raising the issue of victim notification. And in the documents that I've circulated, I've addressed the issue of victim notification as well. The career prosecutor in this case had a difficult decision to make, and she didn't make it alone. She made it in consultation with the FBI, and she made it in consultation with the office.
He's so disingenuous.
The agreement that had been negotiated had an unusual provision. Even though this was a state case, the victims would have the opportunity to receive restitution. Epstein would be required to pay for them to hire a lawyer to bring a case against him, a case in which he would have to plead no contest and provide them with restitution. And the concern, and these are the words of the career prosecutor, that, quote, she did not want to share with the victims that the office was attempting to secure for them the ability to obtain monetary compensation, because she is aware that if she disclosed that and the negotiations fell through, Epstein's counsel would use this to question the victim's credibility. And her concerns were not hypothetical. One of Epstein's attorneys had already
He's
asked one
talking
of the
to
victims,
deflect from
quote,
the actual
now
question.
tell me
I
about
caught
when the
myself
federal
like, what?
prosecutors told you
He's
about
just talking
getting
to talk
money.
right now.
And so when the agreement was signed, shortly after the agreement was signed, Epstein's counsels indicated that Epstein may not comply with the agreement. And the agreement was appealed at various levels within the Justice Department.
How's Epstein in charge
And she
here?
details in this affidavit, an affidavit that's also corroborated by the FBI case agent, how she and he and the office was concerned that Epstein might not comply, and we would have to go to trial. And we had to weigh the issue of how much to disclose against the issue of if we have to go to trial, we want to win. We want to put Epstein away.
No emotion
And
here at all.
talking about this
He's cold-blooded.
would allow him to make the argument at trial that their testimony was compromised. And so when it was finally clear that Epstein would comply with the agreement, she talks about how she made efforts to notify the victims.
He's
How
reading
that
a
was
script.
a Friday afternoon at
He's not taking
4:15,
questions. He's reading a
and
script.
that she learned that the state had scheduled the plea for 8:30 the following Monday. And she talks about how over the weekend, she made every effort to notify the victims at that time.
But then why did
The plea deal said you couldn't notify the victims. The sweetheart deal you gave them.
Earlier, you described the approach you took in negotiating this deal as an ultimatum to Mr. Epstein.
Learn to
And
speak, you
I
prostitute.
wanted to draw your attention to APA standards for prosecutors, standard 3-4.3, which says a prosecutor should seek or file criminal charges only if the prosecutor reasonably believes the charges are supported by probable cause.
Freaking rumbling when we're trying to hear. This is what you hear when you're trying to raise your voice. Talk with conviction, you bum. What is wrong with
Did
you?
you believe, sir, that the evidence against Epstein?
Sorry,
wouldn't
I'm
it be
getting
sufficient to
frustrated
secure
here.
conviction beyond a reasonable doubt for the federal offenses listed in the non-prosecution agreement? And if so, why was it not in the interest of justice to charge him with these crimes?
So again, I would refer you to the documents I've provided. There is a big gulf between
Look at his facial
sufficient
expression.
evidence to go to trial and sufficient evidence to be confident in the outcome of that trial.
Right, certainly.
And so if I could, and I'll give you a follow-up in a minute, but if I could. And so when this case, and I provided a letter that outlined some of the timeline of this. In July of 2007, the career staff from my office met, and they said, these are the 4 points that you will have to do in state court. And if not, we will proceed federally. They were very serious that they would proceed federally. That does not mean that they were confident in the final outcome. And one of the tough questions in these cases, what is the value of a secured guilty plea with registration versus rolling the dice? And I know that in 2019, looking back on 2008, things may look different. But this was the judgment of prosecutors with dozens of years of experience. If you look through that letter, you'll see this was not a single person making those decisions.
Another guy.
Who wanted to follow up.
So, respectfully, sir,
If I was there, I would. Oh.
describe what would happen if Epstein rejected the deal. It's you would roll the dice.
Great audio there,
with
Bob.
charges, and I understand that you're saying now that it's never a slam dunk, but it seems like you're making this out to be a case in which you held the possibility of a federal indictment over the head of Mr. Epstein to get him to plead to a lesser crime, and that in and of itself is against the ABA. standards.
I do not think that the office violated the ABA standards by negotiating strongly and forcefully. Sir.
Is that strongly,
Standing here
forcefully?
today, are
Give
you
him
basically
sleep
saying
away
that you
camp.
feel that you did everything you could, you got the best deal you could get, and you have no regrets?
Yeah, good question. Good question.
We believe that we proceeded
Do you have any regrets, schmuck?
that based on the evidence, and not just my opinion, but I've shared the affidavit, based on the evidence, there was value to getting a guilty plea and having him register.
What a
Look,
joke.
no regrets is a very hard question. At my confirmation hearing, I was asked a similar question, and one of the issues that I raised is we expect a lot more transparency today. As you watch these victim interviews, it's very obvious that the victims feel that this was not a sufficient outcome. These victims were traumatized. We can't begin to understand what they went through. And they look at this and they say, but why? And
No
so you
emotion,
always look
almost
back
like
and you
he's
say,
smiling. Look
what
at him.
if? What I can say is, at the time, and I've provided a timeline, I've provided information about the individuals involved, this was the view of the office. There is a value to a sure guilty plea because letting him walk, letting what the state attorney was ready to do go forward would have been absolutely awful.
Oh, come on. Awful. Look at him. He can't hold his smile.
Yes, Ben Penn from Bloomberg Law. In light of the attention this week on your handling of, back in 2008, victims of sex trafficking, I wanted to ask about your role today as a Secretary of Labor. You have oversight through the Wage and Hour Division of certifying visas for victims of human trafficking, including sex trafficking. And just last week, your Wage and Hour Division issued a new policy that would essentially allow the agency, it's being criticized by a lot of people I talk to for allowing the agency to completely remove itself or to virtually remove itself from continuing to
Ask the
certify
question,
these
you
visas
boob.
by referring them to other agencies. How can you
So-
Come
defend,
on.
what was the purpose of that
So
policy?
that
I wish
is,
I was
if
there.
you read the policy, that is not what it does. our wage and hour
He's looking down and
administrator, after she
smiling.
was confirmed, came in
This is why people
and she
believe in
reviewed the
lizard people,
policies.
by the way. I don't believe in it, but this is
And
why.
she put in place a requirement that a criminal prosecutor be consulted anytime one of these issues is brought to the division's attention. And that seems very reasonable. Don't we want criminal prosecutors to be consulted whenever someone says that they are a victim of trafficking? And that prosecutor will be consulted. And even if that prosecutor says this is not a case that we are going forward with, the division will still consider whether to issue that visa on the facts. So that is a mischaracterization of her decision and her policy. Yes.
Could you go into a bit more detail about where and how you exactly negotiated this deal? Did you meet with Epstein's attorney alone at a Marriott hotel?
So, I've read this, and one of the things I find interesting is how facts become facts because they're in a newspaper as opposed to the record. I pulled up, I found out the details of that meeting because I scratched my own head about it, and I've provided you a timeline in a letter of the negotiations that make it very clear that this was negotiated by career prosecutors.
Where?
I'm going to answer your question. The meeting that was alleged was a breakfast meeting that took place after the agreement was negotiated, not before. The agreement was signed in September.
Why are you
After
having
the
private
agreement was
meetings
negotiated,
after
one of
everything?
Epstein's attorneys asked for a meeting, asked for a hearing. I was giving a speech. I was staying at a hotel. I agreed to have a brief meeting, I believe at 7 a.m. Rather than open the office, I spoke with that attorney.
Why are
And
you
then I
having
referred that
breakfast
attorney
with
to the
pedophile
career
protectors?
prosecutors. Nothing changed in that agreement. They continued to litigate the matter. They continued to appeal the matter to Washington, and nothing changed with one exception. There was an addendum that made clear that Epstein had to pay for any attorney that represented a victim in the cases against Epstein. And so, yes, I met with opposing counsel. It was a breakfast meeting because I was staying at the hotel. It was after, not before, and
Doesn't
not
help
part
your
of the
case, dude.
negotiations. But it was after
stop
the
laughing when you're
agreement
talking about
had
the
been
victims.
negotiated. And that could be confirmed simply by looking at the date on the agreement and the date on the meeting.
Now, is hindsight was a good idea to do that?
So, number one, the agreement had already been locked in place, so the agreement wasn't going to change. Before that agreement, I was very careful to not negotiate this. Our career attorneys negotiated the agreement. Secondly, I'd point out, we live in a city where people have breakfast meetings all the time. You don't open an office at 7 o'clock in the morning just to have a meeting. You have it over
meetings with
breakfast.
pedophile protectors.
Yeah.
It's not standard for a non-prosecution agreement to include a secrecy
Let me
clause.
do this. I had called Ian. I'll come back to you.
Don't the young girls?
I wanted to give Ian an opportunity. I'll come back to you in a
I
minute.
wish I was there.
Thank you, sir. You've mentioned several times that you and the prosecutors in your office weren't sure that you could secure a win in this case. But the very purpose of the CVRA is to give the victims an opportunity to weigh in. And a federal judge ruled that you broke federal law by not doing so. Do you think that your thinking would have been different had you followed the law and consulted the victims?
So first, let me
Or at least inform
Let
the
me
victims.
point out, we followed department policy. Department policy at the time made very clear, and this is in a written statement that was subsequently issued by what is called the Office of Legal Counsel, which is the chief the chief legal arm of the Department of Justice, that these situations with non-prosecution agreements are not covered by the CVRA at the time, because the CVRA, according to department policy, does not attach until a case is actually brought. Now, I understand that the judge had a different view, and I understand that the judge's view was that department policy did not comply with the law. And that's the way our system works. Our system works in that a judge can say what the department policy is not consistent with the law. Now, let me also point out, since then, a few years ago, Congress amended the CVRA, and Congress amended it explicitly to say that non-prosecution agreements would be in fact covered. And that is a good thing. As I said at my confirmation hearing, we expect a lot more transparency. If we had had more transparency, perhaps this case would have gone differently. I've laid out the reasons
He's having a hard time
why
saying this.
there were
saying this.
concerns about providing all the details to the victims
Without laughing.
before Epstein pled. But the Department of Justice has been very clear throughout multiple presidential administrations, throughout multiple attorneys general, that the department's position is that there was no violation of the law. Yes,
Would you make
I'm
this
sorry,
same?
your name and who you're with?
I'm Caitlin Collins for
Show
CNN.
that awkward
Would you make this same agreement today?
lick. Yeah.
So these questions are always very difficult because we now have 12 years of knowledge and hindsight, and we live in a very different world. Today's world treats victims very, very differently. Today's world does not allow some of the victim shaming that could have taken place at trial 12 years ago. Today's world understands that when interviewing victims, when eliciting testimony, that testimony can be sometimes contradictory, that memories are difficult. And so I don't think we can say, take a case that is this old and fully know how it would play out today.
But these victims say you failed them.
I understand what the victims say, and I'm not here to try to say that I can stand in their shoes or that I can address their concerns. I'm here to say we did what we did because we wanted to see Epstein go to jail. He
He went
needed
to
to
sleepaway
go
camp.
to jail.
But he was out of jail before
He
the
needed-
victims
he
even
needed-
found out about this agreement.
He needed to go to jail.
He didn't.
And that was the focus. John Funk. John? John?
Mr. Secretary, can I ask you a question about the Office of Professional
Yes.
Responsibility?
Hi, Peter Alexander from NBC.
Yeah.
To be clear, dozens of girls were allegedly molested. Why didn't you just keep investigating? And then a follow-up, please.
Yeah. Why didn't you keep investigating?
So the victims of which we were aware were part of this, and under the agreement in the Southern District of Florida, the investigation ceased and they had the opportunity to proceed civilly. That does not mean that the investigation had to cease nationwide. And as we see today, as we saw in New York, investigations could certainly and obviously have proceeded in other districts.
On the follow-up, how can you be trusted to enforce human trafficking laws as Secretary of Labor, given your history with this case?
Yeah.
So I have
More
been,
of a
I
statement.
started one of the first human trafficking task forces at the Department of Justice. I have been aggressive prosecuting human trafficking. We stepped in this case, and we stopped a bad state plea. And so I understand from today's perspective that people scratch their heads and they say, why? Here's the question to ask. How many other times have you seen a U.S. Attorney's Office intervene in a state matter and say, stop the state plea because it is insufficient? Yes.
Is this the face of fighting trafficking?
I want to
Does this
ask you
look
a
like the face
question
of
about
fighting
the Office of
trafficking?
Professional Responsibility. Earlier this year, it was disclosed that they're doing a review into how you and other prosecutors in your office handled this matter. What is the status of that? What exactly are they looking at? Will you submit to an interview, even though you're no longer with the Justice Department? And if they find any misconduct, will you resign?
First, I don't know what the status of that is. I would refer that to the Office of Professional Responsibility. I don't speak for them. I will clearly submit for an interview, even though I don't have to. I think what they do is important. The Office of Professional Responsibility will have access to the full record. They will have access to all the facts. They will have access to the FBI reports. They'll have access to the victim interviews. They can look at this matter in its totality. And so I think it is important that they proceed. I will gladly be part of it. And I think what they will find is that the office acted appropriately. Ma'am.
Hi, Secretary. Hi,
How are you?
Secretary Acosta. It's Yami Shelcender with PBS NewsHour. As Labor Secretary, you've tried repeatedly to cut a program that deals with human trafficking in the Labor Department by up to 80%, going before Congress, advocating for that.
We covered
Why
that
should people
today.
trust you to focus on human trafficking and protect victims if you've done that? And I'd like a follow-up question.
So you're referring to grants that go to foreign countries for foreign country labor-related work. As part of the budget every year, those grants have been removed, as have other grants for foreign countries. And let me just add, as part of the budget every year, those grants are put right back in by Congress. This is what happens in Washington, and I fully suspect that those grants will remain in this year. Your follow-up.
My follow-up question is, sources have told me that the president encouraged you to hold this press conference. Can you speak a little bit about what the president told you ahead of this press conference and whether you're here to give a message to the president? Are you fighting for your job, or are you trying to send a message to victims? And if so, what is the message to victims who say they don't trust you anymore?
So first, I'm not about to talk about conversations with the president, and I'm not here to send any signal to the president. I think it's important. A lot of questions were raised. And this has reached the point that I think it's important to have a public hearing. I think it's important that these questions be asked and answered. And as to a message to the victims.
And that's why he dodges most of them.
The message is you need to come forward. I heard this morning that another victim came forward and made horrendous allegations. Allegations that should never happen to any woman, much less a young girl.
That you allowed him to
And
get away with.
as victims come forward, these cases can be brought, and they can be brought by the federal government, they can be brought by state attorneys, and they will be brought. We have seen in the last few years cases brought against individuals that got away with things for well over a decade. And it's important to realize that people were getting away with these. People were not going to jail at all. And we're aware of those high-profile cases, and we've seen as victims come forward how the justice system deals with them. And so the message to victims is come forward. Sir.
Secretary.
Let me take a few more.
Hi, Mr. Secretary. Richard Madden, CTV. You just said victims need to come.
I'm sorry, Richard?
Madden with CTV Television. You just said a moment ago the victims should come forward, but you still haven't offered an apology to them. Why is that?
So the victims should come forward because the justice system needs to hear from them. And what the victims went through is horrific. What the victims continue to go through is horrific. I've seen these videos. I've seen the interviews. I've seen the interviews on television of these victims and their stories. And so it's hard. But I also think it's important that we understand that the men and women of my office, going back to 2006 and 2007 and 2008, have spent their career prosecuting these types of cases. And in their heart, in our heart, we were trying to do the right thing for these victims. And so this is horrific. This is awful. Each one of these cases is just devastating and saddening. But I also think it's important to realize that the prosecutors were trying to do the right thing. Sir.
Yeah, Jeff Earl from Daily Mail. How are you? Are you aware of alleged obstruction of justice by Mr. Epstein? It seemed to have been mentioned in a bail memo by New York prosecutors. And did he take efforts to intimidate prosecutors? And if he did, or harass witnesses, tamper witnesses, if he did that, why would he get what's been called a sweetheart deal?
I can't comment on the New York case. That would not be appropriate.
Were you aware of it in Florida? I'm talking about it in Florida. Did he obstruct justice?
Sir, there is a pending New York case in New York. I can't comment. Sir.
Sure. I'm curious, who at Maine Justice, at Neil McCabe, One American News, who at Maine Justice reviewed this case or your decision, and did you have any interaction with Robert Mueller at the time?
So I shared a letter that I wrote to one of Epstein's defense attorneys, and I shared that letter in part because it shows much of the timeline. It shows how initially the meetings that took place, were between in July, between the first assistant, the criminal chief, the Palm Beach office chief, and the line attorney and 2 FBI agents with Epstein's attorneys. You'll notice at the initial meeting, as outlined in this letter, who are all career attorneys, how they presented the terms, how Epstein's attorneys were dissatisfied and asked for a meeting with me, how I subsequently went with their attorneys, along with all the career officials, how at that meeting we then invited the chief of the Child Exploitation and Obscenity Section from the Department of Justice to travel down, because one of the things we wanted to make sure of was that we had, going back to the earlier question about the ABA rule, that we had sufficient evidence to proceed ethically. And then it details a little bit on how Epstein's counsels appealed the decisions to Washington. I'd refer you to the record. One of the really disturbing things about this case is there's a record here. The documents that I shared today, we've shared previously with media, yet I've seen no reference to any of these documents in the perspective of some of these prosecutors. There's a record. All these documents are publicly available and could have been pulled up by anyone in this room. And so, there is a record that will, I wasn't at Main Justice. I do not have a full list of the individuals that reviewed this matter at Main Justice. I can tell you the individuals referenced in this letter. And I would refer you to the record because this was 12 years ago. I do not have a full list of the individuals that reviewed this at Main Justice. Well, as the record makes clear, individuals from Main Justice were involved fairly early on and were certainly aware of it. And I think if you look at the record, it will become clear that our decisions were appealed again and again to Main Justice. Sir.
I'm going to have a lot to say
Adam
about
Shiver
this.
from the Financial Times. So the deal that you negotiated resulted in two things. One is that the case ended with Mr. Epstein pleading to state prostitution charges, and another thing that it did was that it immunized his co-conspirators. So two questions. Did you consider his victims in that case to be prostitutes, and why did you immunize his co-conspirators?
So the answer to were the victims prostitutes? No. Victims, they were victims. End of story. They were victims. The second part of that is
justice because of you.
The purpose in this case was to bring Epstein to jail, to put him behind bars. And so there were other individuals that may have been involved that in any type of conspiracy, there are individuals around someone. The focus really is on the top player, and that's where our focus appropriately was. Let me also say something, because a lot has been said about this 13-month. When we proceeded, the expectation was that it would be an 18-month sentence, and the expectation was that it would be served in jail. And so this work release was complete BS. And I've been on record as far back as 2011 saying that it was not what was bargained for and it was not what we expected. But this was a state court plea, and because it was a state court plea, the terms of confinement were under the jurisdiction of the state of Florida. And so the outrage over that 13-month, getting to leave jail is entirely appropriate. When we entered into this, I at least, fully thought that he would be spending the time in jail. That's what we mean by someone going to jail.
He was in a private section in his own private ward.
If I can get a brief statement in Spanish, I would really appreciate it.
I'll tell you what, if you answer if you ask me a question in Spanish, I will answer in Spanish. Is that fair?
No.
I was trying to get a brief statement, so that I could go over.
What are you doing? What is this? This is not Spanish class. Señorita, we got something. We got pedophiles to deal with.
Nuestros fiscales en este asunto querían que este señor fuera a la cárcel.
Well, a number of important, Shepard Smith in New York, and we'll go back when this returns to English, but a number of important points. First of all, Secretary Acosta says of the deal that the Miami Herald called the deal of a lifetime.
Hold on, I'm going to keep watching this if they come back to that cringe fest. I'm going to read your super chats in a little bit. There's a lot to uncover here. I mean, we have a smiling, smug word salad by a lizard-looking SOB that took no responsibility at all. Did not apologize. Pretty much just shifted the blame. It's not my fault. It's not my fault at all. No. It's the fault of the state that gave him a single charge, and that this issue is, quote, complex, hard, complicated, shifting the blame away from himself. Meanwhile, it took these documents to be finally released about what actually happened here, to finally get the bigger truth here. Again, my goodness, golly gracious. Epstein, by the way, and in this video, I'm going to criticize Trump and I'm going to support Trump. I'm going to give you the full truth here, because no one does give you both sides of the story. There's things that Trump does here in this Epstein case that are commendable. There are some things that are very not commendable, to say the least. Okay, they're back to the press conference here. Let's go back to it.
Victims came forward, and there were several victims. You know, I believe that in one of the filings, the Department of Justice talked to several of the victims, and some of the victims just didn't want any public notoriety. Other victims have provided interviews and said they felt let down, that they were let down. These are really hard cases. The prosecutors in my office and I were focused on putting him in jail. I provided the information from the career attorney as to why there were concerns. If we went to trial and it became clear that they were going to receive money if he was convicted, how that would impeach their credibility. And today, that would proceed very differently, because victim shaming is just not accepted. But the circumstances of trials and what juries would consider 12 years ago was different. And so these were the judgments that were made. I understand that individuals will look at these judgments and say, well, maybe a different judgment should have been made. You know, you can always look at a play after the fact and say, should it have been the safe play, or should you have gone for the big score? And ask which is the right outcome.
Not letting a pit go is a good outcome.
I provided these documents so that you could hear from the prosecutors themselves how this was being weighed. Sir.
Jesse Seidman, Vice News. Did the Miami Herald reach out to you last November? And if so, why didn't you set the record straight on the breakfast meeting then?
So media has reached out to me over the years about this. I
Epstein.
think it's very important. The Department of Justice is the entity that is litigating all these matters. And quite honestly, until recently, I haven't commented on this since 2011, because I think it's important for the United States to litigate cases through the Department of Justice. And if former U.S. attorneys responded to media inquiries about pending cases, and this is a pending case, there was a live, and there still is a live civil matter. If former U.S. attorneys responded to media inquiries all the time, we'd have havoc in our justice system. You can't have a Department of Justice as a litigating entity with U.S. attorneys giving press statements. Now, your follow-up question may be, why am I talking today? And the answer is, this has clearly reached a level where I thought it was important to have this kind of press conference, to take questions, and to provide these facts and these perspectives.
And not answer any questions.
I understand that individuals may say this was not enough. But this is the way it was viewed, not only by me, but by many back in 2008.
Yes, Doug Christian from Talk Media News.
Yeah.
One thing, yes. You said that the victims were not prostitutes, but the agreement was he was jailed for prostitution charges, not for sex trafficking. Can you just say what the distinction was?
The agreement was, this was a state. Here's why this is hard. This was a state case. He was arraigned. A state grand jury returned a prostitution charge against him, a solicitation charge, if I recall. That was a state grand jury. He was allowed to self-surrender by the state attorney's office as a result of that single charge that would have resulted in no jail time. And ultimately, what the agreement did was say you have to go back and you have to plead to a more serious state charge that requires jail time. that requires registration, and under this agreement, you'll have a mechanism for restitution. But the agreement itself, ultimately, the state of Florida and the state attorney's office in Florida is a separate sovereign. The U.S. attorney does not determine how those offices run themselves or what charges they bring. I do not consider the victims prostitutes. I think that is insulting to them. These were victims. They were not just women victims, they were children victims.
Secretary, Mr. Secretary, I'm Deborah Saunders with the Las Vegas Review-Journal. Since Mr. Epstein left jail, he's been a public figure. He's been a man about town. He hasn't seemed particularly contrite about what he did. What have you thought when you've seen him?
What I've thought is I keep reading newspaper articles about pending investigations here or there. If someone does a Google search, they'll see that there were rumors of investigations going on for the last 10 years. And New York finally stood up and they took one of those investigations and they brought charges. And in all candor, I wish it would have happened. I'm glad to see that it's happening now. He's a bad man, and he needs to be put away. And based on additional allegations that I saw this morning, there are multiple jurisdictions, whether federal or state, that he's going to have to answer to. A few more questions. Yes.
Alex Doherty with Miami Herald. I wanted to ask and follow up with your answer to the earlier question about the potential co-conspirators. Were you confident at the time that any potential additional co-conspirators didn't commit sexual abuses against underage girls like Epstein did, even if it may not have been at the same scale? Because some of those victims have accused others of doing similar acts to them.
Including the royal family.
Let me see how I can address your question without running afoul of Department of Justice guidelines.
Scapegoating, he means.
If my office had been aware of individuals who committed acts
Look at him laughing.
such as
Smiling.
sexual abuse, my office, it would not have been my position that those individuals should have been part of that kind of immunity. It's not even an immunity deal. Should not have been part of that paragraph. And so I know that there are a lot of rumors about who those individuals may or may not
They're
be.
statements by victims.
I think those rumors are misconstruing the acts of the office with respect to that particular paragraph. One more question.
Richard Lardner from the Associated Press. Mr. Secretary, were you ever made aware at any point in your handling of this case if Mr. Epstein was an intelligence asset of some sort?
So there has been reporting to that effect.
Good question.
And let me say, there's been reporting to a lot of effects in this case.
Look at him smiling.
Not just now, but over the years. And again, I would hesitate to take this reporting as fact. This was a case that was brought by our office. It was brought based on the facts. And I look at that reporting and others. I can't address it directly because of our guidelines. But I can tell you that a lot of reporting is just going down rabbit holes. A few more questions.
Did you answer the
A few more
question or
questions. Have you
not,
asked
you
a question
bum?
yet?
I have, but I got
Okay. How about that in front of you? Yes.
My goodness.
Sorry, I'm trying to do a one
Whenever a
question per
politician
person.
does that, I just
Okay.
automatically
Can I
don't
go ahead?
believe him.
Yeah.
Hi, Katie Rogers with the New York Times. I'm just wondering what makes you so confident that the president is going to continue to have you serve. There have been several advisors of his who he stands up for initially, but you're about at the level where he has backed away before. So what makes you so confident?
So, look, I am here to talk about this case. I'm doing my job. If at some point the president decides that I am not the best person to do this job, I respect that. That is his choice. I serve at the pleasure of the president.
That was a petty
I
question.
thought yesterday he was kind and he showed great support. But we have to remember, we are here because we are part of an administration that is creating jobs, that is creating growth, that is really transforming our
please.
economy and focusing
Letting
it
pedophiles
on,
go, fly around the world,
the,
and do whatever
the
they
forgotten
want.
man and woman. And if at some
Let
point
other
he
criminals
says, look,
off the hook.
you're not the right person for this right now, or you're standing in the way, I respect that.
Secretary Acosta.
Yes.
Thanks. Do you really have nothing else to say to these victims beyond you should come forward? That places a lot of burden on children. What else do you have to say? You've avoided addressing these people directly. Why is that?
So, to be clear, that is not all I said. You know, I think, if I recall, and I obviously don't have a transcript here, but, you know, what I've said previously is, you know, I have seen these interviews, and I generally can't begin to fathom what these victims have been through.
There's no emotion on your face.
I don't think that anyone that has not been in this situation can begin to fathom. The closest I can come is to think, what would I feel like if one of my girls was going through this? And I would be, you know, I'm not sure I can say the way I would feel on television. But even that is different than what the victims themselves went through. And so the point I'm trying to make is everything that the victims have gone through in these cases is horrific, and their response is entirely justified. At the same time, I think it's important to stand up for the prosecutors of my former office and make clear that what they were trying to do was help these victims.
Yeah.
They should
That's
not
why you let them
be
down.
portrayed as individuals that just didn't care, because they have spent a lifetime of bringing cases like this. They are individuals who really, really do care.
The plea agreement he gave pretty much made sure the victims couldn't even know what Epstein was charged with.
Hi,
What kind of bull
Nikki
crap is
Schwab,
that?
New York Post. How much of this do you think was Epstein getting special treatment because of his enormous wealth and also political connections?
So, you know, I've heard a lot about that. And if you go through the record, you will see that in July, he was presented with certain terms. And I laid this out in a letter, an open letter that I wrote to address some of these questions in 2011. And he was presented with terms. And the office, throughout this entire negotiation, and it took several months, from July to, December, through these 5 months of negotiations, stuck to those terms. You go to jail, you register, and you provide restitution. The original term was 2 years. The office ultimately agreed to 18 months. It had to be an offense. It had to be an offense where there was registration, because the world needed to be on notice that he was a sexual predator. And it had to be a situation where the victims could seek restitution, because it wasn't just enough for him to go to jail. And let me also say, you know, restitution is also not enough. You can never put victims in the place they were before they were victimized. You can't unwind history, but restitution is important. Thank you very much.
Wow. You mentioned his legal team. You mentioned his legal team, how powerful his lawyers were, that they put pressure on you, that they put pressure on DC. Did someone at DOJ tell you or order you to cut a deal with Jeffrey Epstein?
His attorneys certainly filed several appeals with Maine Justice. I will again restate, when the career attorneys met with him, they presented certain terms, and the office stayed true to those terms throughout. Those terms did not change. The agreement did not change. No level of appeal to Maine Justice changed the terms of these initial points in those agreements.
That's not a denial. He's not denying it. That the DOJ told him to give him these lesser charges.
I just had a quick question for you. In the proposed remedies from Jane Doe 1 and 2, one of their requests is can they just meet with you? I know you're not apologizing today, but would you be willing to meet with them?
You know, that's a really good question. This is currently in litigation, and so I don't want to interfere with that litigation. But let me just say, I have monitored this litigation without, you know, I haven't monitored day to day. I have never pulled the full record, but I have watched it. And I have seen what these victims have gone through. And whenever this litigation is concluded, I've always had an open door policy, and I've always welcomed the opportunity to sit down. And I think it'd be really healthy for prosecutors to sometimes circle back and really hear about what happened. Because we all have to learn. You know, one of the questions that came up at my confirmation hearing was, what would you do differently? And I alluded to this. And I said the world is much more transparent. We expect a lot more from government. We are a less trusting society. We can wonder whether that's right or wrong, but we are a less
I
trusting
wonder why.
society
The
today.
pedophiles are running around free because of you.
In part because our culture expects transparency. And so,
which they didn't get
to
under your
sit
plea
down
deal.
and hear from victims how this impacted them, I think would be healthy for prosecutors generally. I can't commit in this particular case, it's in litigation, but I think that would be healthy for prosecutors generally. Thank you very much.
Wow. Wow. I have a lot to say about this. I'm going to get to the super chats in a little bit, but I have a lot of other connecting information, and there has been a lot of things. There's been a lot of things that he particularly alluded. He particularly did not answer that raise a lot of eyebrows. But after all this, I have to say, is it really that hard to say, hey, we failed, we're sorry, and have it be sincere? I mean, that man was not sincere at all. There's so much to get into in this particular case. By the way, this is why we can't trust the mainstream media. Vice, that was there asking questions. This is the article that they ran on December 7th, 2018, not so long ago. This is the article that they ran. Quote, "The Jeffrey Epstein story is fanning the flames of far-right pedophilia panic." Look at the smear. Look at the propaganda. Look at the disinformation by Vice, who's in there asking questions. Again, I don't expect the truth to come out. Again, we just did another kind of deep dive into this video on this YouTube channel, but there's so much to get into. Obviously, Jeffrey Epstein pleaded not guilty, but again, my opinion, my personal opinion, Jeffrey Epstein, he makes Bill Cosby, R. Kelly, literally look like the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus compared to the hundreds, compared to the connections, Soros, Koch, Kissinger, Rockefeller, Rothschild, all connected to this man, a billionaire. No one knows where his money came from. Where did his money come from? And again, he's coming up here and he's saying, oh yeah, I am pleased. He's saying he's pleased that there's going to be charges brought against Jeffrey Epstein in the state of New York. Well, if he's pleased, that means you didn't do a good job at first. That means you should apologize for that, but you haven't. He should resign. Absolutely resign. And I'll give you the reasons why he should resign. It's pretty much common sense. You gave him a sweetheart deal of a lifetime. Look at the conditions that Jeffrey Epstein got for charges that he should have faced life in prison for. He should have faced life in prison for. I'm not buying these excuses with the state being responsible here because they were charging him with a lesser charge. The state was going after him in Florida for prostitution charges. Meanwhile, it was documented that there was little children that were being abused. The state of Florida brought prostitution charges against the little children. How is a state not doing their job? This is unprecedented. This is unprecedented. We're talking about the plea deal here once again. Let's talk about the exact plea deal that Acosta gave Jeffrey Epstein, and then you tell me if Acosta should apologize or not apologize, resign or not resign, because this is absolutely insane. We're going to get into the DOJ stuff and him talking about Epstein potentially being an intelligence officer in just a little bit, which of course he was asked directly, but of course he scurried on and didn't answer that question, which shows a lot of guilt there in my own personal opinion. But this plea deal that was given to Jeffrey Epstein, number one, the victims couldn't know what happened. They were not informed of the plea deal. He was put in a private ward of a prison, a private section in a prison, where he was allowed to leave 12 hours out of the day, go back to his private ward, which is unprecedented, in his jail, and go to sleep. The plea deal protected co-conspirators, which, as we know, many victims have been coming forward and saying, hey, it's not just Jeffrey Epstein. There's other high-level politicians, high-level royalty involved. This is victim testimony saying, hey, it's not just Jeffrey Epstein attacking, abusing children. It's also other individuals. These are, and again, just the levels of individuals that he is connected to, absolutely ridiculous. Again, I don't know why the stream went down and it went up again, but we're going to keep going here. There's a lot to get into this specific case. In my opinion, look at all those charges, look at all these cases. When Jeffrey Epstein was supposed to, by those charges, face life. He was supposed to face life in jail. He literally got 13 months in what essentially was a sleepaway camp. And that is something that Acosta should apologize for, should say sincerely sorry, but he couldn't do that. He was smug, he was smiling, he was giving off word salads, and he wasn't answering very specific questions. Now, Donald Trump here, there's a lot of criticism I could give Donald Trump here specifically, especially with what he said yesterday, specifically claiming that he's not a, quote, fan of Jeffrey Epstein, and that he feels sorry for Acosta. Sorry? Acosta's the one who's responsible for letting this man walk. And he was asked clearly about his connections to the DOJ, whether he belonged to an intelligence agency, and he clearly, this is the biggest takeaway that you're not going to hear in the mainstream media. The mainstream media is not going to be talking about this very important issue of Acosta claiming, reportedly, according to some sources, that Epstein belonged to an intelligence. He was asked this directly. He was asked whether the DOJ intervened and gave him this lesser sentence, this sweetheart deal. And of course, he didn't answer. He didn't answer. He scapegoated. He went around these specific questions about how deep Jeffrey Epstein really is involved. And he's involved in deep aspects of this. And of course, a lot of these allegations about Epstein being involved in intelligence, either a secret branch of the government, of course, is coming from the Daily Beast. That is coming out there from this. There's an article here from Zero Hedge, which of course I will link in the comment section right now. Again, we are live here taking your questions, taking your super chats. We're going to get to those in just a little bit. But this is a bombshell report that is claiming Jeffrey Epstein belonged to intelligence. The Daily Beast reported, quote, "Is the Epstein case going to cause a problem for confirmation hearings?" Acosta had been asked. Acosta had explained breezily, apparently, that back in the day, he had just one meeting on the Epstein case. He cut the non-prosecution deal with one of Epstein's attorneys because he had been told to back off, that Epstein was above his pay grade. "I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone," he told his interviewers in the Trump transition, who evidently thought that was a sufficient answer and went ahead and hired Acosta. The labor secretary had no comment when asked about this. He was asked about this again during the press conference. He didn't answer directly. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. And of course, if this was a blanket no, he would have just said, yeah, no, that's not true at all. But him ignoring this shows you that there's a lot more to the story than we are privy to. That is, again, my opinion on this particular case. Again, the article in the Daily Beast goes on for almost 2 decades for some nebulous reasons, whether to do with ties to foreign intelligence, his billions of dollars, or his social connections. Epstein, whose alleged sexual sickness and horrific assaults on women without means of ability to protect themselves, is well known in his circle, remained untouched. Again, a lot of people here are talking about women. A lot of people here are talking about little girls. No, we're talking about children. Children's innocence being taken away by monsters in our society who are billionaires that no one knows where the money came from, who are connected to all the top level elites and politicians. Bill Clinton denied of understanding and seeing any wrongdoing. I strongly denied that. According to Eric Prince, Hillary Clinton was on the pedo island, the private island that Jeffrey Epstein owns. Again, I will criticize Donald Trump on these specific comments because they are sickening. They do deserve to be criticized. It is stupid for Trump. He's not doing himself any favors. But it also was Donald Trump, by the way, that did help out the prosecution against Jeffrey Epstein. According to the lawyer that was going after Jeffrey Epstein in the state of Florida, it was Donald Trump who did answer his phone calls and did assist him with providing evidence going against Jeffrey Epstein. So that's another important aspect that you're not going to hear in the mainstream media, but that's an important aspect to understand during this case, that Donald Trump did, in fact, previously help. But right now, he is not helping himself with just stupid, asinine comments and not firing Acosta, in my opinion. Now let's get over to some of the super chats here that people were leaving here. We got one by Nadler Sentinel for 5 CHF. I don't know what CHF is. One here by Vladimir Vova Tess, who says, bro, he's reading off what? Wasn't he asked a question? Exactly. One thing you noticed during the press conference, that's a great super chat here by Vladimir. He was asked a specific question. Instead of answering the question, he literally was reading off a freaking scripted talking point. TV Freedomist Films gave 420. Thank you for the 420 super chat. Christina Zamar Gracia, $5 super chat. OG Bilbo says, keep it up, Luke. Where we go one, we go all. Yeah, thank you very much for that. Really appreciate that. Lennon Wilson says Acosta should resign, and I agree. I am not a fan of Acosta. Regardless, he should be held accountable for his actions. He's the one that pulled the trigger on this insane plea deal that absolutely makes no sense. It's the sweetheart deal of a lifetime where he should have faced life in prison, but he didn't because of Acosta. Acosta should at least apologize. He should at least, maybe for his safety, he's not shedding light on the DOJ and intelligence links here, but these are links that we should clearly look into that are clearly very possible with, of course, Acosta's non-answers today. We got Ediaz1247 saying, so if you were traumatized and we can't imagine, you believe what exactly? Regrets in order perhaps? Can't answer a single question straight. Yeah, you're making the comments about Acosta when he was talking about the victims again. It was weird. When he was talking about the victims, he was like smiling half the time, like he was about to crack up and laugh there, which is extremely weird. Very little emotions, very, very just off-putting to say the least. We got Our Reality Radio saying, good job, Luke. Thank you so much for the $20 super chat. Lennon Wilson, the fake news is cutting him slack. The fake news, some of the questions were actually very pointed, very good. Some were very opinionated, not that good. Some were very, soft-handed questions, but some of the journalists really did do a good job, and I do have to commend them for some of the really good, hard-hitting questions, specifically the two about the DOJ and intelligence connections that we heard during this interview. GP4U tonight, you gave 3 super chats, all $2.79 Canadian dollars, and you said, Luke, YouTube is censoring right now, censoring as we speak, censoring what I want to say. Okay, if you guys are having a hard time sending off information and typing stuff at me because YouTube deletes it, which doesn't surprise me, it happens all the time, go to my Twitter account, twitter.com/@LukeWeAreChange. Feel free to tweet at me, especially GP4U tonight, what you wanted to say and what YouTube censored from this chat room. Steph Thompson said Acosta was forced by higher ups, saying, quote, this is according to Steph Thompson, Pizzagate is real. Well, Acosta, again, we don't know that for sure. There's no evidence, but there's a lot of opinions that would lead that way because of the non-answers that happened. The non-answers are very critical here. FU 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 Abel says thank you for your work. Well, thank you so much. Avatas, good to see you, Avatas, longtime viewer here of this independent media broadcast. Again, you're watching independent media. That's not left. That's not right. There's things that we criticize Trump on. There's things that we praise Trump on. It's important to cover this work honestly, okay? I'm not here trying to get political brownie points. I'm not here trying to push an agenda. I'm not here trying to tell you what you should think. I'm not here trying to create a lynch mob. I'm trying to get to the bottom of the truth here so you realize the bigger picture that's taking place here. And again, the bigger picture that's taking place here could pretty much be described by this meme. The left is pretty much concentrating on Jeffrey Epstein taking down Trump. The right is concentrating on Jeffrey Epstein taking down Bill Clinton. Well, in fact, we should understand that this man's ties to these presidents shows you everything you need to know about the current state of American politics. Again, going down in the chat rooms, Lennon Wilson, yep, frustrated. Lennon Wilson again, criminal in suits. Lennon Wilson, I support Trump, but Acosta must resign. I respect your opinion, but I agree with you specifically that Trump must make Acosta resign. Again, this is absolutely insane that this man who gave him a sweetheart deal of a lifetime, let him walk and roam freely, is able to not even apologize for his work. It's absolutely incredulous to see what was happening here. Got another super chat here by Primus81. Got another super chat by John McGuire. Regarding Epstein intelligence connections, do you think he was a child pimp first, then tapped, or was he created whole cloth by the intelligence apparatuses? Well, John, one thing you have to understand when you look at how spying and intelligence works, not just how the way Hollywood portrays it, but specifically it works with a lot of individuals who are disposable, who get caught up in crime. It could be that, again, I'm speculating here, but it could be that Jeffrey Epstein was someone, because again, you look at his education, he doesn't have a degree in anything. He came out of nowhere. No one knows how he made billions of dollars. It could have came to the fact that he was caught doing something very illegal, and after being caught, intelligence agencies came to him and says, hey, we'll let you off all of these charges if you take care of this particular role. He could be an asset of intelligence agencies. That's what we learned from today's kind of press conference. That's the main headline that should be running in mainstream media headlines, but is not. They should connect the dots a lot better, but they are not. That's why they're the mainstream media, and that's why you're watching this on independent media that gets censored, demonetized, deranked all the time. If you guys don't share this information, it won't get out there. People don't understand the significance and importance of you taking part in this larger information war and saying, hey, enough is enough. This information needs to get out there, and it's only going to get out there if I take responsibility. Avatas is saying, damn spammers. Yeah, there were some weird spammers in here. I've been trying to delete some of them. I don't delete comments, but when you're trying to put adult pornography, especially on this serious channel, I'm gonna block you for spamming pornography. I mean, this is not the appropriate time to be spamming pornography on this channel. I'm sorry. That's something that I need an exception for. If you have an opinion that I don't like, I will not censor you. I have never censored anyone. But seriously, seeing the links and seeing the grotesque content that YouTube allows on here, meanwhile censoring us, I mean, Lordy. Again, moving on here with the comments. Roosevelt Media News says, love you, Luke. Love your work. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Ronald Francis, $1 super chat. Thank you guys so much for the super chats. Thank you so much for your participation in this independent media broadcast. Again, we are live here. We're doing all of this because of you, your donations, your support. I do a lot of live streaming now, but absolutely not on this platform. I do it. Let me put in the link so you guys could see where we're doing this. Let me go back into the screen and show you exactly where we are doing this. By the way, if you want to support independent media, you could do that not only through donations, one-time, monthly $5 donations that mean the world to us, behind-the-scenes subscriptions, Change Media University, cryptocurrencies, physical mail, but you could actually do that by using platforms that are pretty incredible. One of the platforms that we're using is this one right here that PewDiePie is on, that he's live streaming on, that we're also live streaming on. So you should definitely check out that link, and the link to that is, of course, on wearechange.org/donate. I am putting that in the comment section right now. Other than that, if there's any questions, I will answer them. If you have any further comments, feel free to let me know on my Twitter account. Again, twitter.com/Luke WeAreChange to continue the conversation. Other than that, holy cow, that was a lot of information that we just got out there. I have a lot more to say. I'm going to be covering this extremely closely. Our eyes need to be peeled on this because at any moment in time, this could be turned around and used in a very negative light. This could be turned around and there could be no justice. Our eyeballs, our attention is key on this very, very important issue. I will be live streaming later tonight on the other platform, probably playing video games and playing Russian hard bass, but that's a whole nother story and a whole nother thing that I'm doing on the side as well. Again, look at the crazy comments coming in there. I think I made Avatas one of the every time there's like a long time viewer, someone that I keep seeing in the super chats and chat rooms that is reasonable. Every time there's a new member, I make sure to make them a moderator. But again, I tell my moderators not to do anything. FU 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 Abel is a new member. Thank you so much for joining as a membership here. We're going to be doing more live streams. Obviously, we were just in Washington, D.C., where we were doing a complete live stream of all the events that were happening down there when, of course, Antifa was facing off against the Proud Boys. Again, it's all up on our YouTube channel. Scott Munson, $2 super chat, giant hugs. Ken R, $1 super chat. Really, really appreciate that very much. But again, we have been going live. What is this thing here? Okay, got to get rid of that. But we were live in Washington, D.C., with my helmet on at the D.C. Free Speech Week. So any other major events coming up, your participation in this independent media organization, it's just me. Like, I'm sweating here. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I'm doing the production all by myself. I'm doing the change of scenes all by myself. I'm doing the audio and everything else. Oh, look, more pharma advertising on mainstream media. What a big surprise there. As, of course, YouTube is screwing us. It's just me, guys. So all the help I get is greatly, greatly appreciated. You guys supporting me here and letting me know, not only through donations, but saying, hey, this thing is happening here. You should go out there is also very, very important. So this organization would not be possible. That's why we're called WeAreChange. And that's why I love you guys. Thank you again so much for watching. Stay tuned for more here on WeAreChange.org.